Oh, the mic was off. Apparently, I think we missed it. It's okay. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone, once again. So I was saying, um, this is awkward. So today we're going to talk about Gazni and Ghori in perspective. It is a theme that encompasses part of my own particular research that I'm pursuing, and you know, it is a topic that might encompass studies that you might be doing in your BA second semester, or let's say third semester papers, founding of the Delhi Sultanate, or let's say Arab incursions, or topics related to that. So let's begin with talking a bit about Ghazni as a person, and let's say Ghori as a person, on let's say certain objective histories that we and you might be familiar with, but I would still like to talk about them. So Ghazni, if I am to begin talking about Ghazni, the general narrative begins with this person. Muhammad bin Qasim. I'm sure everybody knows this name, a person who comes and conquers, or I would say he arrives into India somewhere around 711 and 712. And he's the person who lays the foundation of, let's say, beginning of conquest. But the people from Arabia, people from Persia, people from Central Asia and all of these places, they were constantly in touch with India throughout the periods preceding this, and they had already come to the coast of Kerala, before Qasim's conquests. So this is not the first arrival of this person, but this is considered as the first, I would say, incursion into India, a conquest that, takes away, or, a conquest that is inspired by orders that are given from, the Caliph, or let's say people from Iraq, and let's say Syria, and larger paradigms. We have to connect all of this with larger questions and larger debates and larger connections of people and diplomatic ties and people coming into India, people going away from India into, let's say, Persia. Because you see, in the early medieval period, there is evidence of 10,000 Banya communities living in Isfahan in the early medieval period. So it is not like the migration of people, or let's say contact, was one way. It was never one way. It is always two way. All right. So we need to understand all of this. We have to look at a wide variety of sources. We have to look at sources in different contexts, sources in isolation, and sources representing larger pictures. So what are we going to talk about in the next 20-25 minutes? We need to study Ghori and Gazni, because I titled this lecture not just Ghori and Gazni, but Ghori and Gazni in perspective, because we need to place them in history. We need to talk about what is coming and what is coming in the historical narrative, because it is not just a history, it is not just a chain of historical events, because we see them as historical events after certain amounts of research, but we have to see not this as just historical events, but as interpretations. And representations. It is not just about historical events. We all can come up with, we all can research sources and talk about this happened, this happened, this happened, and this happened. But how do we place all of these events? How do we understand them? We have to revisit our sources in order to talk about what they are going to say, because what we are encountering, we think that we are studying events of conquest. When we talk about Ghazni and Ghori, we think about conquest. We think that we are studying events of conquests or invasions and Arab incursions and stuff like that. But the sources the sources through which we study all of these events, they represent something that is an interpretation and representation of what is being studied. It's a complex argument. The sources are not just about historical events. The sources themselves, the source material themselves, the source material itself is an interpretation and representation of what is happening. All right. So what are the sources through which we study, the incursions of these people? Right. What are our sources? We have to talk about our sources if we are, dealing with all of these people. So for bin Qasim's conquest, one of the most cited source is the Chachnama. Chachnama has been titled as the Book of Conquest. However, Chachnama is written in the 13th century. Chachnama is written in the 13th century by Ali Kufi at the directions of Nasiruddin Kubacha. All right. However, it was originally composed by some warrior, some anonymous person who was in bin Qasim's camp. It's basically an 8th century revisited in the 13th century. And through the basis of this, we are reconstructing bin Qasim's conquests. All right. So it is from 712 to, let's say, 13th century. It's like a 400 to 500 period gap through which we study bin Qasim's conquest. However, there are other sources, but this is one of the most cited sources in order to study this. There's another which is Kitabul Buldan. And there are other works of, let's say, Al-Umri and a lot of Arab travelers who are writing about all of this in the 8th century and in the 9th century. All right. So when we come to Ghazni, when we talk about Ghazni, all right, when we talk about Ghazni per se, so Ghazni is basically the first person to take up the title of Sultan. All right, he's the first person who says that I am Sultan. In the Islamic world, is the first person to adopt this particular title. All right, we all know Ghazni comes to India and his raids begin somewhere around 1000 and Ghazni dies in 1030. So this is around, a period of, let's say, 30 years, 25 years, preceding this particular time period and, somewhere around this particular time period. All right, his incursions begin somewhere before this and they continue up till this particular time period. All right. So Ghazni is the first person to take up the title of Sultan because he has subdued some person called Khalaf bin Ahmad. Khalaf bin Ahmad, and we see that we've got this from the source called Tariq-e-Guzida, a text titled Tariq-e-Guzida. The spelling of Guzida might, vary, but this is the source that says that he's the first person to take up the title of Sultan because he's defeated this particular person. And Ghazni's incursion into India is talked about by multiple people including Al-Utbi, who is a person who is at Ghazni's court. All right, this person is at Ghazni's court and he says that the reason for the incursion of Ghazni into India was probably jihad. All right. However, Utbi is the person who's writing for the Caliph in Central Asia, or let's say the Fertile Crescent. All right. He never comes to India. He is a person who is at Ghazni's court in Ghazna, but he never comes to India with Ghazna. But the person who comes to India is the person, we all know this person, and that person is Al-Biruni. Al-Biruni stays in India for 10 years, and don't take Al-Biruni to be a light person. He is not. He is one of the most sophisticated, educated person that is existing in the early medieval period. He is a person who is basically, I would say, the most important scholar that we study, because everybody knows his text, which is Tehqiq-e-Hind, Kitabul-Hind, all of that. We know that his text is so voluminous, and he is talking about India. He's talking about India, and he says, and this is where my whole thing about Ghazni and Ghori will begin, because he says that Ghazni brought about, calamity and destruction, and he ruined the prosperity of India. This is a quote from Al-Biruni. His Kitabul Hind. Sakhaw is the person who has translated Al-Biruni's work into English. If you have the time, just read some chapters of it. It's got so many chapters, and you can read so many things about Al-Biruni, because a lot of time examiners are going to ask questions about what does Al-Biruni say, because they're going to be giving a quote to you and you have to recognize who is the scholar behind that quote. So I always urge you as my students to read the primary source. All right, at least read parts of it. Don't read the whole thing. You can't read the whole thing. If you start to read the whole thing, you will probably be finishing your PhD. But read certain parts of it. Read, let's say, 5 to 10 pages. And where my thing about Ghazni and where I place him in perspective is the beginning of where Al-Biruni writes that, he brought calamity or, destruction to Hindustan or Hind, or the land of Al-Hind. Remember, Arabs are the first people to use the term Hind. All right. Now, he is saying that in the tone of sigh. He is sad about it. Al-Biruni is sad about it. He is not happy. He is not saying that it's a great deed that the Sultan has done, but he's saying that he's particularly sad about the destruction that has been caused by the armies of Ghazni. All right, he's pretty sad. And now let's also see what certain things. Let's see the background of what India looks like. What India looks like is that we've got the Hindu Shahis in Kashmir. Hindu Shahis in, I should not write JNK, I should just write Kashmir. Hindu Shahis are the first people that they encounter. And in Punjab, we've got, the Hindu Shahis are in Punjab. I'm so sorry. The Hindu Shahis are in Punjab. How could I forget that? The Hindu Shahis are in Punjab because these are the first people that they encounter. All right, Punjab and Sindh is the first place that, Ghazni encounters these people. And it is, we've got the rule of Queen Didda in Kashmir during this particular time period. We've got Queen Didda is in Kashmir. I'm so sorry, I mixed it up. We've got the Pratiharas around Kannauj. All right. To be precise, the ruler, I think, was Rajyapal. Rajyapal is the person during the Rajyapal, Jaipal, all these people. And we've got Rajendra Chol and Rajaraja Chol who are ruling in the Tamil country. All right, and in Bengal, we've got the Pala rulers. So basically, it's the Palas, the Mahipal, I think, to be precise, I think, which was Mahipal. So these are all, sporadic and distributed at the time when Ghazni is first coming into India. All right. There's sometimes question comes as who was there, and we can have a chronology of all of these people. So that is why I'm giving you all of these facts. But the point that I'm trying to make over here is that we need to put Ghazni into perspective. And because Ghazni, when he comes, he issues also, silver coins. Silver coins that have, the Kalma written on one side, and he's got, Lakshmi on the other. In the Sharda script in Kashmir. So what does that indicate? He could have simply gone with just Arabic verses. He's using Arabic on his coins, but he also uses, the Sharda script. Why is he doing that? Because, it is not just conquest that we see when these people come into this particular region. You need to talk about people who come into this particular place, issuage of coinage and all of this. It shows some sort of accommodation, some sort of negotiation and some sort of collaboration. Because when we see Chachnama, and this is the work by Manan Asaf that I want to discuss with you. Manan Asif, he's written the book called A Book of Conquest. And he's reviewing Chachnama as a primary source to study, the incursion of Ghazni. And he says, and he talks about all the collaborators, that all the collaboration that happens when Ghazni is coming into India. It is not a neat history, because Chachnama is not written just as a book of conquest, as a Tariq literature. Chachnama is written in the form of mirror of princes. This is the tradition in which the Chachnama is written, and it follows something like the Mirror of Princes is basically following, a text that you might know is Fatwa-e-Jahadari. Fatwa-e-Jahadari is written by Ziauddin Barani. If you would know, it is a text that does not really talk about the conquest in Delhi Sultanate, but it is a book that talks about the moral, ethical code, or let's say the rule or the theory of kingship or the theory of rule of the Delhi Sultanate. And Chachnama is written in this format in 13th century, and it is a rewritten version of, the conquest of Mahmud Ghazni. All right. What does that mean? It means that it is reinterpretation of something that happened 500 years ago in order to accommodate into what was the need of the hour in the Delhi Sultanate, or let's say when Ghori is trying to establish his particular rule, because it is talking about negotiation. It is talking about, I would say, and how I would like to call it, governance and legitimacy of governance. Not particularly governance, but, it is talking about accommodation and advances. No, not just advances, but accommodation while advance that is happening under Ghazni. Because why otherwise would Ghazni, issue coins that have got Lakshmi's portrait? He could simply just conquer the people and subdue them. But it does not happen as clean as has been taught to you in, your +2 classrooms, or the narrative that has been drawn to you. You need to look beyond just the history of those events. You need to see how it is reinterpretation and interpretation in the first place, because our source is talking about it. You see, when the Gupta Empire declines and the Huns take over, or the Huns, or let's say Toraman or Mirkul are also ruling, they are essentially described as nomads. All right, I compare this to, let's say, the Hunas almost 800 years ago before Ghazni. Not 800, I would say 600 years ago. All right. And they are also issuing coins of, let's say, Shaiva worship. Although Huns are nomads. There's an inscription that says that Mirkul never bowed his head in front of anyone but in front of Lord Shiva. What does that indicate? It indicates some sort of negotiation and accommodation in terms of the new rulership that is emerging in, let's say, Punjab or Sindh, or in, let's say, northern India during this particular time period. So we need to look across the 17, raids that have been taught to us by Ghazni, because it comes up again and again from, let's say, Punjab to the Hindu Shahis to all of these places to Somnath and all these places. We need to look beyond just raids. All right. We need to look at that political history from a different perspective, because it is something that has been going on, and it is the rule of the early medieval period. It is the rule and the norm of the early medieval world. Conquest, reformulation, reaffirmation, reinterpretation, and all of this, and fractionalization, regionalization, all of this is happening in a very different context of the early medieval period, because Ghazni stands right at the middle, right at the juncture of the beginning of the second millennium CE. All right, and we need to place him in the larger early medieval world and the early medieval context. All right, with going about what happens with Ghazni, there is also the rise of Ghori that we see. But before that, we need to, look at the categorization. I need to talk to you about categorization. Categorization of the people from, let's say, Central Asia, or let's say people lying in the frontier of India who are part of the larger early medieval world. All right. People who are part of the early medieval world, because you see, it's a huge connection that we can draw between people of, let's say, the land that we call Al-Hind with the larger world. If you call these the Pamir Knot and the Himalayas, all right. If you look at that, it's a world of larger connections beyond the Hindu Kush and beyond the Pamir Knot that we know. So the land of Al-Hind that has been characterized, because as I said, that Al-Hind is the term that the Arabs and the larger Persianate world, or let's say the old world, has also used and started to use for the place that we call India today. All right. So, but also we looked at how Chachnama, or let's say the Persian sources, might be looking at it. And I will, proceed with certain of those sources again, but let's leave Chachnama and all of that. And I have given you certain ideas, but let's come back to Al-Hind, and how is Al-Hind looking at all of these people beyond Al-Hind in their vision. And it's a book that I would recommend you people to read. It's a book that came out. It's a monograph by B.D. Chattopadhyay. The book is titled Representing the Other. And he's got a question mark right at the end of it. All right. B.D. Chattopadhyay. He is one of the stalwarts of understanding early medieval, and you must read B.D. Chattopadhyay if you are reading early medieval. All right. So what do we need to talk about? We need to talk about right now B.D. Chattopadhyay. What he's saying is that in this representation of the other, the categorization is very much not how we see it. It's not, let's say, categorizing them as this particular term. He gives in his appendix the usage of this term to be so minimal that it is almost irrelevant to the discussion, but it is very different to how we see it today. Because we need to talk about how the sources are talking about it. All right. And what are the sources that B.D. Chattopadhyay is looking at? B.D. Chattopadhyay primarily looks at inscriptions in this particular text. And I also want to look at and highlight certain inscriptions, because there are certain terms that are important to our discussion over here. And those terms are a term that has been, a term that is actually used for Gazni, a term that is actually used for people who are belonging to the region of Gazna. And that term is Garjanaka. All right. It is not a term that denotes, let's say, religion of the people or sectarian affiliations or communal affiliations of the people. It is a term that denotes the region of the people, ethnic region of the people. And the next term that I would like to talk to you about, and what Chattopadhyay also talks about, is Parasika. Parasika is a term that links to people from the land of Persia. Persia, Persika, or Persik is a term that comes up because, you know, it is a term that does not denote the category of Muslims. It is a term that we find even in the Raghuvamsh of Kalidas. Kalidas's Raghuvamsh is written before the rise of Islam. So it is a term that appears repeatedly in the inscriptions of early medieval period. So that is why, and it is a term that has got historicity to it. All right. And therefore it is a term that does not represent, let's say, religious affiliations, but it is a way of talking about the other in a different ethnic connotation. It is a term that appears in the Raghuvamsham. Of Kalidas, it is when King Yagu is going about in particular lands and he, you know, also encounters Yavanas. So Yavanas is also a term, but I don't want to talk about Yavanas today right now per se, because I want to talk to you about another important term which, you know, appears repeatedly, and that term is Tajik. Before I go on to talk about the term which is Turushka. All right, these are the terms that we find in the inscriptions from, let's say, 700 till about, you know, 1400, which is the period that, you know, B.T. Chattopadhyay is referring to. But since today we are just talking till Ghori, we are going to talk about just about till sources about that particular period. Now, what is the significance of all of these terms? I would like to give you certain inscriptions that talk about these terms, because these inscriptions can also come in your exam. All right, let's talk about this term. Let us talk about this term, Tajik. Now we would assume that it is a term that would refer to people from Tajikistan. It might be that, but it refers to a particular tribe that were existing in that particular time period, and the tribe were Teyi, which is the pronunciation of that, but it's an old tribe. All right. So this is a term that comes about for people that might have got that from that region or from that tribe or descent from that. However, this is the term that is in focus over here right now. And I would like to talk to you about an inscription from 736 CE, which are the Kavi plates. Kavi plates are probably the first inscription in this particular period that talk about the presence of Tajiks in Western India. All right, it is, you know, the Tajik plates, the Kavi plates, they come from Gujarat, Bharuch, Gujarat from 736 CE, and they talk about Jayabhat IV, who was a Gurjara feudatory, and he intended to convey the meaning that by forcefully subduing the Tajiks, he has, you know, it is essentially, the Kavi plates are essentially a land grant. It's a donation of land, all right, to a particular temple, and he's saying that after forcefully subduing the Tajiks or vanquishing the Tajiks, he has become Ashesh Lok Santap. He has become Ashesh Lok Santap or Santapa, which is he has freed the people from the Santap of the people. He has freed them from their problems. All right. So this is one of the things that, this is one of the first inscription that talks about them. All right. Secondly, I would like to talk about, you know, inscription by Krishna III. All right. Krishna III and his inscription is basically, you know, a period from, let's say, 936 around. Krishna III, 936. Krishna III, who is a Rashtrakuta king, and he says that the Tajiks are part of Western India and that these people have been living over here for a very long time. And he sees them as, you know, either feudatories, or he says them as he has, you know, subdued them, but he sees them as normal political contenders for power in the region, and this is the period that I'm talking about, 936. This is before Ghazni. All right. And after that, you see there is another inscription that I would like to give you, which is the Panjim plates. Panjim plates. The Panjim plates, as the name suggests, they are from Goa, and they are from the period 1050 to 1098, somewhere around 1050 to 1098 CE. All right. So this is post Ghazni. All right. We see from Krishna's time period that they are seeing Tajiks to be a part of, let's say, the larger political arena of India. And then they are saying in the Panjim plates that there is a person called Sadhana, who is of Tajik descent. Sadhana, who is from Tajik descent. From Tajik descent, who is a person, and it's been said that with the good wishes and the good wills of good people, good person, sadhana, there is, prosperity in the realm. Something like good conduct of wise men attracts goodness. So this is Panjim plates in, the region of Goa, and we see that Tajiks have become part of the larger Rashtrakuta, or let's say western part of the world. So that sees them to be, normal, I would say, normalizing the presence of political contenders, and who are essentially seen also in goodwill. They are not essentially seen as, bad, or let's say just normal invaders, because there is a historicity to the arrival of these people into India. There is a historicity to understanding them, and there is a historicity of categorizing them as, people who might be existing in India. And these are the inscriptions through which we see that. Now, let's come to another term, which is Turushka. This is a term that also starts to rise in the early medieval periods. And we see that in, it is a term that appears earlier in the period, in, let's say, texts like, I would say, text like Harsha Charita. I hope everybody is familiar with the text Harsha Charita, which is by Ban Bhatt. All right. Then there is Kumar Pala Charita. All right. So, and also the Turushka is a term that also comes up in Rajtarangini. All right. So these people, they feature in these particular texts. You can, and a question might be asked about what sort of texts that don't talk about these categories or something of that sort. But we see from, let's say, another inscription, which is the Sarada inscription, that we find the presence of these people also. Sarada inscription plates, or Sarada inscription, which also talks about these people. And it says that these were belonging to the category, and the presence of these people is, before, let's say, conversion to Islam. And it's something that has been done by R.C. Majumdar. So this is reliable, because R.C. Majumdar is looking at Gwalior inscription of Raja Bhoj, which is from 835. 835, Bhoja's inscription. R.C. Majumdar is saying that these people in 835 are pre-converts. These are pre-converts. All right. And this is the term, these are the terms that are, ultimately might be associated with the coming of Gazni and Ghori. The point that I'm trying to make is that the categorization of these people in the early medieval period, in the early medieval context, is something that the Sanskrit sources, because these are all inscriptions, these are usually in Sanskrit, and all of these Sanskrit sources are categorizing Gazni and arrival of Ghori or something of that sort into a into a category that is familiar to themselves. It is something that they find themselves to be familiarized with. They are not trying to be precise. The sources never differentiate between Gazni or Ghori, because Ghaznavids are different and Ghorids are different. All right, they don't differentiate between them, or they don't essentially categorize themselves to be inimical because of sectarian or those sort of lines of religious affiliations. They are categorizing them in categories that are familiar to them in a larger context or a predefined historical context. How they have been familiar to these terms. Because you see, Parasika is a term that appears in the Raghuvamsham, which is the Gupta period, way back. So they are using terms for these people in which how they are familiar with the identities of these people. All right, now let's move on to certain other sources that essentially deal with the person who is Muhammad Ghori. All right, and a text that I'm sure that you might be familiar with is this. Because so far we were talking about Ghazni, let's move on to discussions on when Ghori is arriving and the texts that might be composed in the period when Ghori is arriving. So Prithviraj Vijaya is a text that is composed around 1191, 1193. It is a text that is incomplete, but it is a text that talks about the rise of Prithviraj Chauhan, the Chauhan or Chauhan ruler of Delhi during that time period. And this text says that Prithviraj's consolidation to power was not contingent upon him dealing with Ghori. Prithviraj's rise is not contingent exactly upon Ghori or subduing Ghori. The text says that his victory over a person named Nagarjun, who is from Gudpura, who's taken over Gudpura, and Nagarjun features. And the victory of Prithviraj over Nagarjun is much more important in the narrative of Prithviraj Vijaya, because this text talks about the rise of Prithviraj Chauhan and the consolidation of the Chauhan power. And how does this text refers to Ghori, but how does this text refers to Ghori? This text refers to Ghori as beef-eating Malech. This is a term that this text uses, and you see the important term over here is this. Malech, because this is a term that is categorically used to describe all the others in Indian tradition, not just people coming from Arabia, Central Asia, stuff like that, but the larger Brahmanical discourse, the larger Vaishnavite, Shaivite, or larger Vedic Brahmanical discourse about Malech is a term that is denoted for people who don't follow, let's say Vedic rituals or Vedic sacrifices. And it is a term that is used to describe Ghori in Prithviraj Vijaya. And Ghori is not written as person who is the most important for Prithviraj to defeat in order to consolidate his power in Delhi. Delhi is the term that is used for Delhi. Delhi Zameen, Raja Delhi, stuff like that. All right, you can read about it. So this is the thing that I'm trying to do. This is what the difference is about. Categorization into a term that is familiar to them. All right. This is the difference. And let's talk about another text, which is the Hamira Mahakavya. It's a text that deals later than, let's say, it is not talking essentially about Ghori, but it is a text that talks about Alauddin. It is a text that talks about Alauddin Khilji with, Raja Hamir from Ranstambapura or Ranthambore. And he says that the tussle between the text that I should write is Hamir Mahakavya, Hamir Mahakavya. The text says that the tussle between Alauddin Khilji and Hamir Dev, Raja Hamir Dev from Ranstambapura was started because Hamir insults a person, an official at his own court, and that official goes to Alauddin Khilji's court, and Alauddin Khilji takes the help of a lot of, the Vengis and let's say other people from the region in order to have a battle against Hamir. And Hamir ultimately commits suicide because he is, frustrated with his treacherous officials. And, this is the reason why the conquest is, the conquest, or let's say the trouble between these two people, is given in the text Hamir Mahakavya. There is no connotation of, let's say, this starting because of religious, affiliations or stuff like that. This is a different sort of categorization, because by the time Alauddin Khilji is over here, these are accepted people from as a part of the larger political foray of the early medieval period, or the medieval period that we are talking about, that these are normal contenders to power in the region, if you are to talk about. And let's talk about something else. Let's talk about another inscription that is very important, which is the Palam Baoli inscription. The Palam Baoli inscription of 1276, and this is the last primary source that I would like to analyze, and before I conclude, the Palam Baoli inscription talks about the place of Delhi. It is basically a land grant for the construction of a waterwork, because the name suggests Baoli is it's something of that. It's a waterwork it's a public irrigation waterwork that I would like to characterize in particularly Delhi. And the name that we find for Delhi is Shri Yoginipura in this particular place. Shri Yoginipura. Palam Baoli inscription talks about Delhi to be Shri Yoginipura, and here's what is interesting about Palam Baoli inscription. The Palam Baoli inscription says that Delhi, or let's say the universe, is ruled by Lord Shankar. All right, the universe is ruled by Lord Shankar, but currently Delhi, or Shri Yoginipura, is ruled by certain lineages. And what are those lineages? The lineages that it says that firstly Delhi was ruled by the Tomars, then it was ruled by Chauhans, and then it was ruled by Shakas, or let's say Shakas. Now, what is the significance of this? Shakas is again a term, a categorical term that is used in early medieval period and ancient Indian sources to talk about the other or the outsider. The other. It is not essentially a reflection on, let's say, religious or I would say sectarian differences, but it is something that lies outside. But it is something, the Palam Baoli inscription says that this is an accepted lineage. It is an accepted lineage of rule, a lineage that begins with Shahabadina. Shahabadina is the term, or Shahabuddin or Shahabadina or Shahabuddin is the term that is used for Ghori. He is an accepted person in this particular inscription in the lineage, because it's the year 1276. Here's what is also interesting. This is the term that is used for Balban. This is the epithet that is given to Balban. Shri Hamir Gayasadina. Shri Hamir. Shri Hamir Gayasadina, which is the term that is used for Balban. All right. So you see, these are the inscriptions that talk about, because later on in another inscriptions also, but that is not the part of our concern. These are concerned. These are seen as people who are accepted in the domain of, let's say, understanding the early medieval context. It is a larger history in which we can see that these are accepted categories, not accepted, I would say, in terms of, but yes, of course, accepted in the terms of political rulers of a particular landmass, because we see a lot of these people when Gazni also comes to India and when Ghori also comes to India and when they are establishing, it is a time period, what they are saying is that they are giving also revenue and, you know, revenue and employment to a lot of people. Because you see, when when the Kawatul Islam mosque is constructed, these people are paid in the currency that has got both Arabic and, let's say, Sanskrit verses, or let's say Indian images, or let's say, you know, accepted Brahmanical images behind them. So this is the larger perspective in which we need to place these particular people, because I could also give you, you know, a political history or political background of Ghori of, let's say, 1175 is the period when he first comes. 1178 when he suffers the first defeat in Gujarat, which is at Mount Abu. And these are all what I'm talking about Ghori. All right, 1178 is when he suffers a defeat at Mount Abu at the hands of the person who is, you know, Mularaj II. It's a feudatory defeat. All right. Then in 1188, Ghori is going to take over Tabar Hind. 1191 is when he loses to Prithviraj first, and then 1192 is when he wins against Prithviraj. All right, so this is a brief history of you know, let's say, first incursion. This is the defeat at Mount Abu at the hands of Mularaj. Then incursion into Bhatinda or Tabar Hind, that causes the first battle of Terrain, and ultimately when 1192 when he wins the battle of Terrain again. 1194 he wins Chandawar, and 1206, 1194 is Chandawar, and 1206 is when he dies. He is assassinated by Kokars. It is assumed that he is assassinated by them. So what we need to see, and how I would like to conclude, is that the sources don't clearly name these people. They don't differentiate between these people. They don't clearly define that. We've seen that in how we looked at, you know, the terminologies given by B.D. Chattopadhyay. We looked at all of those terminologies, which is what Chattopadhyay is talking about in the inscriptions that we find. We looked at Chachnama. We looked at the larger, you know, early medieval interpretation of how they are revisiting the kind of, you know, reinterpreting the kind of conquest that they have done in the medieval and the early medieval period. And then we looked at certain texts that talk about certain categories and certain epithets that are given. So we see that history becomes a set of interpretations framed in historical context. It is the context that is important, in which the texts of Hamir Mahakavya, which is written somewhere around 1401, is, you know, written, or let's say Prithviraj Vijay, which is written in 1191. So it is history that we know it today becomes a history of interpretations. We are seeing at their interpretation in their particular context. So we need to see Gazni and Ghori in that particular light, right? All right. So the question is not what exactly happened or what was the conquest. The question, the larger historical question that we should have at hand is, how do different traditions choose to see themselves, or how they are interpreting each other in what they are doing in this particular time period. So thank you so much for listening. These are a lot of things that we covered today. And I tried to be, you know, brief, but I could not be because of, you know, certain things that we had to talk about, see, we had to discuss. All right, if you have any queries, you can reach out to me. You can reach out to me via email, and we are trying to schedule classes for BA students in their particular courses. You can reach out to me via email, and we are trying to begin, or I'm trying to begin, let's say, offline courses also for you. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and see you later.